Z of Zombies Day 0 Part 2. In Buenos Aires, the origin of the slogan, "Nothing happens," the pride of some leaders, the convenience of economic interests, indifference and ignorance, had their classic price after the euphemisms and tendency advertising campaigns. The first cases of infected were minimized for the general public, until the security personnel ended up being overtaken by the constant outbreaks that were given in the peripheral neighborhoods. Due to the conditions of the WOK rules, many doubted to face the infected who attacked with all freedom those who were unlucky enough to be within their reach. In the heart of the city, a heterogeneous group of people had established their last bastion, an ancient cultural center with its red brick walls and large broken windows. The roof was dropping, the bathrooms were not working and the electricity had been cut. The beams were crumbling under the storm. There, in the midst of chaos, they found security. The graffiti on the walls proclaimed messages of hope and despair in equal measure. The survivors had taken refuge in the most hideous places, theaters, underground cellars and even the Casa Rosada. The leader of the group was Mateo, an ex-military with scars and a look that crossed the darkness. Next to him was Anna, a doctor who had lost her family in the first moments. Charles, the engineer, had improvised barricades and traps to keep the dead alive. Yazi, the young woman, had managed to maintain communications with other dispersed groups by a manual charge radio. Alpha Tango Bravo, position 37.7749S, 122.4194W, request evacuation. Dr. Goldman is with us. Don't trust Vlad. Sarah Lou Pennington, if you get me, keep looking. Yunjai, minutes A1. Reside. ENDOFTRANSMISSION. And not all of them were friends. Lucky, the journalist, was suspicious of everyone. I've seen too much betrayal and selfishness in the last few months. In the last few years. Richard, the old man, was holding on to the hope that everything would return to the way it used to be. And then there was Eve, the 8-year-old girl who had lost her parents and found consolation in the embrace of Yazi and a cracked bear. The refuge was a microcosm of humanity, fears, struggles, small triumphs. The nights were tense, with a sound of zombies scratching the doors. But there were also moments of laughter when someone found a can of duraznos in a almar or a bottle of wine forgotten in a cellar. In the basement, Mateo had a worn-out map that marked possible shelters around the world. Names of distant cities such as Tokyo, New York and Sydney were mixed with those of nearby places such as Montevideo, Asuncion and Santiago. The group dreamed of finding a safe place. But in the meantime, in the streets of Buenos Aires, the zombies were camping. Barcelona, the capital of the state of Anzoátegui, Venezuela, a city that used to vibrate with a passion for baseball and the richness of its culture, now from the decline of the last decades, is approaching the edge of the abyss. The government, in its desire to maintain control, hid the truth from its citizens. The outbreaks of zombies spread in the shadows. The Russian baseball team, the Siberian Wolves, arrived in Barcelona for the championship grand finale. His presence in the city was a new spectacle for the inhabitants, a momentary distraction from the daily nightmare. And fate had other plans. Even darker. On the same day of the final, when the stadiums were filled with anxious spectators, zombie outbreaks erupted in the streets. The shouts of the players and the applause of the crowd were mixed with the noises of pain. The players, armed with baseball bats and gloves, began to fight for their lives as the infected advanced. In the middle of the chaos, the North Korean team, the Red Dragons, was also in the city. His coach, the enigmatic General Kang, had trained his players in survival tactics. The baseball final, it became a battle for survival. Players from both teams united, leaving aside their rivalries. The grades became a battlefield body to body, where baseball beats were raised against the hordes. In the heart of the city, the St. Christopher's Cathedral was erected as a last bastion of hope. There, a group of survivors took refuge, including a young Korean named Yin, nicknamed the Chinese, who had discovered something behind the outbreaks of infected people. Yin suspected that the key to the infection was related to something from the government. while the players were fighting in the stadium, Yin infiltrated the government headquarters. He found classified documents revealing some of the sources of the outbreak. With that information, Yin and the players embarked on a suicide mission. The players of both teams faced in a deadly dance to the falling zombies and Yin to the secrets. London, Day 0. The sun was hiding behind the tall buildings of London, dyeing the sky in golden and orange tones. It was a Friday like any other, or at least that's what the inhabitants of the city thought. The pubs were full, the beer flowed generously, and laughter resonated in the streets. In the heart of the city, the West End Theatre vibrated with the excitement of a successful performance. The light shone on the stage, and the actors gave life to immortal characters. In the row of chairs, Sophie, a young student of literature, plunged into the plot of a classical work. But something was about to change. Outside, the shadows widened. The restaurants served exquisite dishes, and the beggars talked lively. Nobody suspected that everything was about to collapse. Scientists had warned of an unknown virus, but no one paid attention. After all, London was an invulnerable city, wasn't it? But then it turned out to be Day 0. The lights of the pubs blinked and went out. The beer was poured out. And in the streets, while people ran away despaired, restaurants became scenes of horror. The commensals were attacked by the infected who had already turned into hungry and ruthless creatures. Theaters and cinemas, now full of refugees. Sophie, trapped in the theater, saw the actors turn into zombies. His glassy eyes and his ugly movements were a nightmare. The place turned into chaos and chairs rose against the undead. The snoring of the infected people mixed with the screams. On the streets, SAS soldier Jack led his group. His face, graced by the war, showed determination. I'd seen death before, but this was different. The zombies were relentless, and the city collapsed. Sophie and Jack met in a dark alley. Their gazes crossed, and they knew they were together in this. In the midst of terror, they entered the Tower of London. The zombies surrounded them. Jack and his group fought like lions. The Tower of London, an ancient fortress and prison, stood up imposing in front of them. Its stone walls had survived centuries of history, but now faced a threat more terrifying than any invasion in the past. The zombies, hungry and ruthless, gathered in the shadows, their lifeless eyes fixed on the fresh flesh that wandered inside. Jack and Sophie proceeded cautiously through the leavened bridge. The air smells of moisture and decomposition. They lit flashing torches, casting grotesque shadows on the stones. The yelling of the undead resounded in the air like a macabre choir. Sophie squeezed the sleeve of her old ceremonial sword that she found in a corner of the theater. Jack, with his assault rifle, was by his side. His gaze was firm, his jaw tense. I had seen friends fall to the zombies, and I was not willing to lose anyone else. The interior of the tower was dark and mazed. The dwarf stairs twisted upward, and every step crumbled under his feet. The murmurings of the infected seemed to follow them, as if the stone itself were alive. The zombies were approaching, their clutches scratching the walls. The battle unleashed. The narrow hallways were filled with shots, screams, and the metallic smell of blood. Sophie fought fiercely, her sword cutting flesh neither alive nor dead. Jack was shooting with deadly precision, but the numbers were against him. Sophie and Jack looked at each other with a light of hope in their tired eyes. Maybe, just maybe, they could survive. And so, in the darkness of the Tower of London, history was written with blood and sacrifice. Lhasa, Tibet, Day 0. Buddhists versus zombies. Lhasa, the city of the sun, rose majestically in the heights of Tibet. Their golden roof shone under the merciless sun, and the prayer flags waved in the wind, their mantras whispering prayer to the sky. But today, on Day 0, the sacred city faced an unimaginable threat, the living dead. Buddhist monks, with their saffron-colored tunics and their serene faces, had become warriors. His mails, rosaries, were now improvised weapons, and his prayers were mixed with battle screams. The Gampa temples had been fortified, and the Kangsun monasteries had become shelters for the survivors. I, Tenzin, a young Noviti monk, was in the Jokhang, the most sacred temple in Lhasa. My heart was beating strongly while holding my torch, symbol of enlightenment, in one hand and my fervor ritual daga in the other. The zombies were dragging through the streets, their eyes empty and their bodies broken down. How did this happen? The epidemic had begun in the mountains, far from Laza. The villagers had strange behavior among the animals, goats who attacked their shepherds, and horns that swinned over the travelers. But no one had paid attention until the first zombies appeared in the villages. Their bites were mortal, and those who fell rose again like hungry creatures of human flesh. They recalled the ancient prophecies when the Yaki, hungry ghosts, walk among the living. Buddhists will rise to protect the pure earth. And that's how the monks became warriors, fighting the curse that threatened to destroy their world. In the Jokhang, the Tankas, religious paintings had unfolded on the walls, depicting the Bodhisattvas, seers illuminados, in their struggle against evil. I looked at Avalokiteshvara, the compassionate, and I was wondering if I would have the strength to fight the zombies. My teacher, the Venerable Lama Dorje, had told me, true enlightenment is not in escaping suffering, but to face it courageously. Day 0 came with a roar. Zombies assaulted the walls of Laza with her scattered bodies and sharp nails. The monks fought fiercely, their mantras resonating in the air. But the horde was innumerable and the city was in danger. It was then that I saw something unexpected, a lonely Yaki, his faint face and his empty eyes. We were not only warriors, but also guardians of compassion. Buddhists not only fought against zombies, but also for their redemption. So began the Battle of Laza with blood and dust. The Bodhisattvas fought alongside the monks, and the sacred city became a battlefield between light and darkness.